Greetings, War Thunderers. This is Longshot, with a guide on how to fly the P-39 Airacobra in arcade. Before I get started on the guide, I'm going to take a departure from my normal routine in these videos and take a brief look at the history of the Airacobra, as I really find it quite interesting. The plane was designed around the 37mm cannon, which resulted in the engine being placed behind the pilot in order to leave room in the nose for the weapons. The Airacobras were intended to fulfill the role of a high-altitude interceptor. However, for some inexplicable reason, the multi-stage turbocharger was left off the plane, which ruined its high-altitude performance. A batch of Airacobras were sent to England in 1940, redesignated as P400s, with a 37mm cannon replaced with a 20mm Hispano. But the Brits were not impressed by the plane and sent most of their P400s on to Russia. The US Air Force sent their remaining P400s to the Southwest Pacific Theatre, where they were used mostly for ground attack and reconnaissance. They believed the plane simply wasn't capable of performing as a fighter against Japanese Zeros and Oscars, but even so, when it was forced into that role, it managed to hold its own, though the plane was generally disliked by pilots and referred to as a P-40 with a zero on its tail. However, the Russians had taken a real liking to the plane, and over the course of the war they ordered nearly 5,000 of them through the Lend-Lease program. They used the plane as a fighter at mid to low altitudes, maintaining air superiority right above a battlefield in support of their ground forces. There's an urban myth that the Soviets used the plane as a tank buster, but that simply wasn't the case. There were many Russian aces who flew Airacobras right through the war, running up large numbers of kills. And that's enough of the history lesson. Let's take a look at the plane in War Thunder. The US lineup has two of them, the P-39N and the P-39Q. The main difference is a substitution of the N's wing-mounted light machine guns with a pair of 50 cals, though the Q was also said to be the lightest and most manoeuvrable of the Airacobras. Russia has a premium, the P-39K, which to me seems pretty much identical to the American N model, and there's also a gift Russian P-39N, which is only available through occasional events. The gift plane has no guns in the wings, making it lighter with improved climb and roll speed. It's said to be extremely good, however I don't own it, so I can't talk from first-hand experience. So in this video I will concentrate on the American P-39s, and to start with, let's look at the armour. We have shielding in the tail behind the engine, and plenty in front of and behind the pilot, who is quite well protected. The X-ray shows the Achilles heel of this plane, large exposed fuel tanks in the wings. If those catch alight, you're nearly always doomed, and the same problem can be found in the P-63 King Cobras. Okay, let's see how the planes fly. This is the 39Q, but I'll compare it to the N throughout this to show any differences in their behaviour. The first thing I notice is that the plane feels powerful. It willingly lifts up into a climb and holds its speed at a fairly steep angle. Its best climbing speeds between 250 and 260 kilometers an hour, or 155 to 165 miles per hour, and that'll get you from a 2,000 meter spawn to around 4,100 meters or 13,400 feet in 2 WEPs. And while there are faster climbing planes, that's certainly a good climb rate, though it does lose performance if you keep climbing above this altitude. As usual, I will test roll speed next, and I'll compare it to both the P-39N and to the USMC Corsair. The 39N has the fastest roll rate, and the Corsair is noticeably slower than both Airacobras. Let's see how they go on a horizontal turn with flaps raised. This time, the 39Q is doing better than the N, and the Corsair is better than both of them, but not by as large a margin as I would have expected. But obviously none of these planes are going to outturn a Spitfire or Zero. Cobras managed to retain over 300 kilometers an hour in the turn, so it's worth trying again with combat flaps, and I'll show the 39Q's original turn without flaps in the lower right corner. And this is a little surprising. The 39N gains the most from using combat flaps here. Indeed, it's now turning as well as the Q. However, when I compare them to the Q's turn without flaps, there isn't really a great deal of difference. These planes simply aren't very good when it comes to elevator turning, so let's see how they perform using the rudder. I'll show the Corsair on the lower right, and on the left the P-39Q performing an elevator turn for comparison. In this manoeuvre I'm holding left rudder and up elevator together and tapping the right roll key as needed to keep the planes straight. And firstly, the rudder turn is a lot tighter than the elevator turn. So if you're flying an Airacobra in arcade and you get into a dogfight, you simply have to use the rudder. And looking at the other comparisons, both Cobras are easily outturning the Corsair, but they'd have no chance in a dogfight against the Spitfire 2B. So while you can surprise people who only turn with elevators or mouse aim, I'd still recommend trying to avoid getting caught in turning battles when flying this plane. Moving along, let's check its high-speed handling, beginning with the roll speed as the plane accelerates in a dive. Both Cobras are now rolling about the same, and while the roll rate does slow down at high speed, it's still fast enough to allow changes of direction, and they're rolling about the same as the Corsair. The Corsair's acceleration in the dive was faster, but the Cobras still pass 850 km an hour in the dive, which is very quick indeed. But its handling at this speed is not great, as the plane suffers from elevator compression. If you're doing over 700 km an hour and your target's not perfectly lined up, forget about trying to track its movements, as while the plane can still roll, it really struggles to turn. And let's see how it goes in a vertical zoom climb, which is a test of its energy retention and its power to weight ratio. By the time its speed drops below 200 km an hour, it has recovered 2,300 meters, which for a 3.7 rated plane is quite good, certainly enough to allow it to perform boom and zoom attacks. I'll take it right up into a stall hammerhead turn, deploying combat flaps, and it flips over on its back rather than turning with the rudder. And it took quite a while to make the turn, so hammerheads are maybe just not its strength, and that's possibly due to the centre of gravity being further toward the tail than usual. Next, let's take a look at the 37mm cannon on these planes. I'll just zoom in and let off a quick burst. Notice the amount of drop due to gravity, which is substantial, and the puffs of smoke as the shells detonate after travelling about 800 or 900 metres, which means you can forget about long-range sniping. The fire rate is fairly slow, the odd shell goes way off target, and if you keep firing it will jam up after about 10 or 11 rounds. So I follow the same strategy as I use with the King Cobra and the Yak 9T, which is to snipe with single shots when appropriate, and at close range just let loose with bursts of up to half a dozen shells. Alright, 7 minutes into the video, so it's high time we saw some footage from battles. I will show you 2 games, both flying the P-39Q. This is a Peleliu domination. I've climbed at the start, and the only enemy up here is an SM-79. So this will be a chance to try out some sniping. As I approach the target, I will deploy combat flaps to try and keep the plane steady while I shoot, and that's something I'll talk about more later on. Firing single shots while zoomed in, and the third one does the job. If it hadn't, I would have opened up with a burst at point blank range. A hit with these shells doesn't always necessarily mean a kill, especially if you're approaching the target from behind. They do have a habit of sparking a bit. In realistic or sim, I would definitely be using the machine guns separately to the cannon, but in arcade with its reloads, in my opinion, there really isn't much point. Anyway, there's a couple of planes about to pass below me on the way to my team's airfield, so this is an opportunity to try a low altitude diving attack. Both of these players are asleep at the wheel, they're looking only at the low altitude planes in front of them, and they're completely oblivious to the danger swooping down from above. My first shot missed, my second did not, and I'll try to pick up the Wildcat as he turns, and it's a real struggle to get my plane on target. Managed to cripple his elevator, which will be enough to send him into the drink. But that illustrated a real problem with the Aerocobras. If you're trying to aim in a turn, it wants to rock up and down, making it very difficult to line up a shot. It's bad enough already with the inaccuracy of the guns, and it just adds to the frustration when your plane wants to fight you as well. I certainly can't criticise its performance though. It seems to have all the power in the world, and it is so quick in a dive. You've just got to plan your attacks to line up shots with minimal changes of direction. And that's what I failed to do in this next engagement. There's a ton of enemies at ground level over their airfield, and I can't make up my mind as to which plane I should attack. I'm spoiled for choice. I begin my dive, realise they're all travelling in the opposite directions from me, so I'll level off, and then dive again from behind. I originally planned to attack the BF-109, and then I think about the A6M to the left, change my mind back to the 109, but I'm no longer lined up properly. The elevator compression plus the plane's rocking behaviour makes it impossible to get a decent shot. I'm easily fast enough to fly away from them. After all, Aerocobras were often quicker than Mustangs in post-war air races, so this is a slippery plane. And I'm using that speed to close in on this Thunderbolt. I'll try sniping first. Set him alight, and now I take a risk to turn and finish him off. The reticle bounced all over the shop, but that shows the benefit of letting loose at close range. With the shotgun spray of shells, there's always a good chance that one of them will hit. And I still have just enough speed to extend away from my pursuers. I obviously was not tempted to dogfight the Spitfire. It's better to get distance and then engage at high speed at a time of my choosing, rather than get involved in a turning battle that I'm not likely to win. It's now safe to turn back and see if I can snipe a plane. I'm going to try for this Spitfire, but this will show the danger of these cannon in close quarters with other friendlies. It's just so easy for a shot to go astray, and I spend the rest of the battle making my apologies. I guess that's what happens though when you fire a hand grenade from a blunderbuss into a crowded room. Okay, so let's move on and look at the second battle, a ground strike, in which I've climbed to bomber altitude. And as is so often the case these days, there's no one to oppose me up here and I'm free to attack this hapless TBD. And because it's such a slow plane, there really isn't much the TBD can do here, except try to turn and dodge my shots. I'll be travelling at a seriously high relative speed for this attack, and watch as the reticle bobbles around, making it nearly impossible to aim accurately. Up and down it goes. I'll conserve my energy by pulling up into a high yo-yo, from which I will look to dive on the TBD from directly above. Just waiting a moment to see if he's turning. He isn't, so I can attack again, this time at a lower speed, which makes aiming a bit easier. And that's how you should deal with a slower plane, no matter what you're flying. Convert your speed to altitude and then dive to attack from above. Never slow down yourself to try and outturn the enemy. Like so many arcade battles these days, no enemy bombers were spawning. Nearly everyone was at low altitude, except my team had a couple of high Wellingtons bombing bases, which meant players trying to climb up and shoot them down, giving me targets to dive on and intercept, such as this P-51. Most bomber pilots would love to have a fighter flying nearby, flying escort, but that's not how it's done. A free-roaming, high-speed fighter is far more effective at keeping bombers safe, taking out targets well before they get in range. And once again my snipe failed, so I just let loose. Eventually something connected. That time it was much easier to aim because my plane was flying straight and level, which seems to eliminate the rocking behaviour. And I'll hold the phone on that for a moment as I have a TBF inbound. I'll keep my speed high as I approach him on an oblique angle while climbing, and then ease off the WEP as I'm going to need it when he predictably lifts up his nose to shoot at me. Here he comes. I hit WEP while lifting into a climbing turn. He can't follow. He's lost all of his speed and manoeuvrability. He's stalling. And so I can drop down for an easy shot at the full profile of his plane. Okay, now watch the rudder. That's the instructor stomping his feet on the pedals. It's that odd centre of gravity again, I think. It seems the instructor can't cope with it, and my guess is that's what's causing the reticle to bounce around when I try to aim in a turn. So for steady aim, try for shots where your wings are parallel with the horizon. It doesn't matter if you're diving, climbing or flying level, just avoid situations when you're trying to aim while the plane's banking to the side. Anyway, the P-51 pilot is trying to climb up to me in a Wildcat, but he's obviously watching me closely and dives away when I attack, and I'm not going to follow him down there. As I zoom climb, I look around, and I can see a P-39Q is trying to follow me up. I'm already leaving him behind, so he must be quite low on speed, so I'll simply put my plane into a loop, which will take me back above him. Then straight over into a dive. But I'm not going to hit WEP to accelerate. Indeed, I'll even deploy combat flaps, as I want to do everything I can to keep the plane steady when I take the shot. The other pilots tried so hard to reach me that he stalled his plane and had no way of avoiding my attack. Okay, back into a zoom climb, and it's time for a check on the Wildcat, who is less than 2 kilometres away on my right. So he's obviously climbed while I was dealing with the P-39, but I still have a substantial energy and altitude advantage. He obviously really wants to engage me. The question is how to deal with him. He dived away the last time I attacked, so I'll try it again. Let's see how he responds. He immediately turns to the left and begins to dive, so once again I abort the attack and continue to observe. This is turning into a bit of a game of cat and mouse. Obviously he's the mouse. I can't get the kill through an obvious boom and zoom, so I'm going to have to be a bit more subtle here. He's climbing back up again, so he's not going to give up. He really does want his revenge, though I'm surprised he didn't choose a more powerful plane for the job. I won't attack just yet. I'll just keep circling above him and wait as he continues to edge his way cautiously upwards. I think he has the idea of reaching my altitude and then turn fighting me. Look at him climbing and then turning back underneath as if to hide himself from view underneath. And I'm happy to let him approach. The closer he is, the less time he will have to evade when I do attack. He's only 1 kilometre away, he's slow, so the time is now. In just a couple of seconds I'm in firing range and I have him on toast. Though I do burn the toast. Notice at low to moderate speeds just then the Airacobra is quite an agile plane. It does seem easier to manoeuvre at 4,000 metres altitude than it does closer to ground level as well. Anyway, with the battle winding down and nothing else of interest happening at bomber altitude, it's time to drop down and engage the lawnmowers, and I'll do so with another high-speed diving attack. Just checking over there, those planes, to see if there's any threats, and now I'll switch to the targets directly underneath. As usual, I'll go for the tail end Charlie first, in this case the P-40, who sees me coming and tries to loop up and face me head on, but he's such a slow speed, he stalls halfway up the loop, and is the easiest of targets. The IL-2 is next, but the angle's difficult, plus there's a real danger he could get guns on me, so I wave off and choose the next tail end Charlie, which is the P-36. And this time I managed to hold the reticle steady enough and score a 7th kill as the game comes to a close. So in summary, the Airacobras are nice planes, but they do have their drawbacks. On the plus side is their excellent acceleration, decent climb rate, their impressive speed and moderate turning ability. But although the cannon packs a devastating punch, it has a slow rate of fire and is quite inaccurate, a problem that's compounded by the plane's habit of rocking up and down while you're trying to line up shots. And those two drawbacks are enough to make this a difficult plane in which to score large numbers of kills. I personally don't enjoy flying it that much, but that's simply due to the aiming issues that I've already discussed. By the way, this video was sponsored by Fat Duke, who through his support on Patreon has encouraged me to fly these planes and spend time on the flight test comparisons, which I hope you all found helpful. In my next vid, I'm going to take a long-awaited look at the Russian Premium Hurricane, otherwise known as the Stalin Cane, which, believe me, is a really enjoyable plane to fly in arcade. Oh, and lastly, if you like the custom skins featured in this video, they're my own work, and they can be downloaded along with my other creations from a link you'll find in the description below. But that's all I have for this video. Good hunting everyone, this is Longshot, signing off, and I will be seeing you in the skies.